No matter what anybody is doing, somebody will have more. But we got to learn to be content. You got to learn to be content with having all of your needs met. And I read that verse and I wonder, are we content with having all of our needs met? Are you content with having all your needs met? Or does it take a lot more than just your basic needs to keep you content? Solomon, the Bible tells us, isn't just one of the wisest men who ever lived. He's also one of the wealthiest. Economists estimate that in today's money, he was worth over 2 trillion, like trillion with a T, dollars. And when you got that kind of money, you can do whatever you want. And that's exactly what he did. He decided he was just going to do everything. He was going to try everything the world had to offer to figure out the meaning of life. And so he built cities and buildings. He won wars. He had wealth. He had women. He wrote poems, just all of it. And he ended up writing this treatise on the meaning of life called Ecclesiastes. And I don't know if you've ever read it, but if you have, you know it is super depressing. Like if you're having a bad day and you're bummed out and you're like, I should read my Bible to feel better, and you open it up to Ecclesiastes, keep on going, just move along. Do not read that book. It'll make things so much worse because it's kind of painfully true. It cuts straight to the heart of the human condition. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4, Solomon has something to say about all of the work we put in, like all the effort that we put forth for our jobs and our education and our sports and our possessions and our looks. He's like, all that stuff that you're striving towards, let me tell you what I think of it. He says, I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. So that's intense. It's pretty neat for Solomon to say all the work that you're doing, all the trying that you're trying, it's just because you're looking at somebody else and you're jealous of what they've got and you've allowed envy to like fester in your soul, and that's the reason you do all that, and it's meaningless and it's chasing the wind and it's hopeless and it's not going to work. And so this is the first thing I want us to see this morning. Discontentment develops when we get caught up in comparing. It rears its ugly head when we try to determine and define who we are based on who other people are. Like, where am I at in comparison to others? When we look in the mirror and we allow our identity to be anchored in what other people have accomplished compared to what we've accomplished, it allows discontentment to just grow inside of us, and that's toxic. In Proverbs 14, Solomon says, envy rots the bones. That's a really gross word picture, isn't it? Like rotten bones inside of us. But it's a powerful reminder that comparison is corrosive. It's easy to get caught up in because we don't think of it as corrosive, but every single time we start measuring ourselves against others, every single time we look at what they have and what I don't have, it eats away at us from the inside out. Comparison is corrosive. It's also useless. It never gets us to the destination we think it'll get us to. The reason we compare is that we think like, hey, if I measure myself against others, I will achieve more and I will accumulate more. But what happens when we get caught up in the comparison trap is that more becomes not enough. We just get stuck in the land of We can get more and more and more, but somebody's got a little bit more than us, and so we have to keep comparing. Comparison is a hamster wheel that we live on, not a journey that has a finish line. And it's toxic to our souls in a really powerful way. It eats alive at us, even when we're doing good things. Even when we're working hard at the work that God's placed in our hands, we can't celebrate our successes because they're not good enough. Somebody has more. So let me challenge you this week to internalize this phrase that Solomon uses to describe it, chasing the wind. I just love that phrase. It's chasing the wind. Because let's be real, at some point, maybe today, maybe while you're sitting at church, but sometime soon, every single one of us are going to find ourselves looking at someone else thinking, oh, I wish I had skin like that. I wish I had a fashion sense like that. I wish I had a car like that. I wish I had a job like that. I wish I had a house like that. I wish I had hair. Not even hair like that, just any hair. Hair. That one might not be universal. I don't know. It's hard to say whether everyone thinks that or not. Everyone in my life thinks that. But like, we do this, and we find discontentment growing in our souls. And when you feel it, when that comparison yields envy, which yields discontentment in you, I want to challenge you to look in the mirror and say something to yourself. Whether you say it out loud or just in your head, look yourself in the eyes and tell yourself you can't win at chasing the wind. Because you can't. It's not a winnable game. Nobody can win at chasing wind. Have you ever tried to catch the wind? It's pointless. It's useless. It's impossible. And when you compare yourself to other people in an attempt to get what they have, it's chasing the wind because it never ends. And so when this discontentment wells up inside of you, tell yourself, hey, you can't win at chasing the wind. But I think it's important here to say that what Solomon's encouraging us to do is not to just quit trying altogether. He's not saying like, hey, effort doesn't matter, achievement doesn't matter, just quit. It's all chasing the wind. He was a guy who accomplished a whole lot, and he continued to accomplish a lot even after he wrote Ecclesiastes. In fact, like right after this verse where he says, I've seen all the stuff that envy produces in you, all that toil, all that chasing the wind. The very next verse is fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. So clearly he's not telling us to give up. He says that's what fools do. And here's what he's getting at. What he's saying is that sometimes envy and comparison cause us to work really hard. They cause us to try to achieve what all the people around us are achieving, but sometimes they suck the motivation right out of our souls and cause us to want to give up. Because we look and we're like, they have a better family than me, they have a better job than me, they're better at sports than me, they're better at everything I want to be good at. Like, that person has a better life than me, and I'm never going to have it, so I might as well just quit. I'm going to fold my hands. I'm going to sit here because what even is the purpose? I don't measure up, so I'm not worthy. It's a really easy place for our souls to get to because discontentment has this like deeply demotivating thing in our souls. It helps us decide, hey, life might not even be worth it. And this leads to the second thing I think Solomon's trying to help us see, and it's that discontentment develops when our experiences don't match our expectations. A couple months ago, I was in Minnesota preaching for my buddy David at Renovation Church. It's a church that helped launch Revision years ago. And afterwards, because his church is located in the town where Jenny and I lived for 6 years, I was going to go to this little Italian place that we used to love. Like, I had it in my mind, like, okay, I'm going to go, I'm going to preach, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go get lunch at this place that I used to love. And then I drove there and it was closed, which was a bummer, because I was in the mood for Italian. So I Googled some other Italian places, went to one nearby, and it was packed with an unbelievable number of people because there was a soccer tournament right across the street. And at that time, I was just hangry. Like, by then, I'm just like, nothing's going right. I'm mad. I'm going to eat food at the next place I see where I can get food. And the next place I saw where I could get food was White Castle. You guys ever been to a White Castle? Now, I love those wet, oniony little sliders more than almost anyone I know. But let me tell you this in case you've never eaten one. At its best, like on a day when you're craving a crave case, White Castle is good in a, that tasted interesting sort of a way. All right, normal White Castle, like an average trip to White Castle, you leave and you think, I shouldn't have eaten that. I'm middle-aged. I got to start making better choices. All right, but on a day when you were craving good Italian food that's also nostalgic, when you eat White Castle, it tastes like plastic and cardboard. It was like literally one of the worst meals of my entire life. I promise you, I drove away from White Castle deeply discontented in my soul. And it wasn't the fault of the sliders. They're just as soggy as usual. Like they're exactly what you get when you go to a White Castle. It was because I had an expectation that didn't match my experiences, and my expectation needed to be reset a little. I think for all of us, when discontentment wells up inside of us, it's often because we have an expectation that isn't matching our experiences. So I think it's worth asking the question, like in your life, where am I frustrated right now? What is it that this is eating away at me? And is there an expectation underneath that frustration that needs to be reset? It's interesting, in 1 Timothy 6, Paul writes to Timothy and kind of resets his expectations for life. Really appreciate what he says. He's like, hey, Timothy, things aren't always going to go the way you want them to go. But godliness with contentment is great gain. I love that. Godliness with contentment is great gain. If we brought nothing into the world and we can take nothing out of it. But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Paul's like, Timothy, there are always going to be people in every area of your life with more than you. Your ministry is not particularly lucrative. But like, no matter what you're doing, man, no matter what anybody is doing, somebody will have more. But we got to learn to be content. You got to learn to be content with having all of your needs met. And I read that verse and I wonder, are we content with having all of our needs met? Are you content with having all your needs met? Or does it take a lot more than just your basic needs to keep you content?